Good evening, everybody. I'm going to give it a few minutes here and let people join up, and then we'll get started, and I'll explain to you guys what we're going to be doing tonight, and then we will get coding. Let's just give it a few more minutes here. So while we wait, I wanted to say that this last Tuesday on our Zoom classroom, we started with looking at some Python code. So if anybody's interested in that, we are starting at a very low level, just making sure that we get the basics down. You're more than welcome to join us with that. Also, if you just have any code that you're working on that you need some help with, Tuesdays, that's the time to let us know. Hop on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or just email us, and we can give you the link to the Zoom classroom, and you'll be able to join us and get whatever help you want, or you can just join us and learn whatever we might be teaching that day. The Python came from one of our other students who is interested in learning some more about written languages, so that's why we were working on that. And we'll probably, sounds like we're going to continue that this next Tuesday. He requested a little bit more information about that, so as long as we get requests coming in, we're going to keep doing it. So more than happy to help out. Just need to hop in and let us know. And as far as if you're watching this at a later date, this goes for every Tuesday. We are available. Let us know. Hop onto social media and give us a holler, and we'll send you the code to join us. We are more than happy to help everybody out. Okay, so I can see a couple people joining, so that's good. I think we're going to get started here. We're just about pushing about 3.5 minutes in right now. So anyway, what we're going to learn today is I'm going to go through and I'm going to talk to you guys about, we're going to do another designing a game concept. And in this designing a game concept, we're going to create an active stage. So a stage in Scratch is that backdrop. So I'm going to jump into create here real quick. You don't have to follow me. I just want to show you guys what I'm talking about. The stage is this spot over here that is on the right. This is where our Scratch Cat is. It lives in the stage, and we have backdrops within our stage. So what we're going to do is we're going to create active stages. Now, active stages make the game way more fun for people. You can have static stages, which are essentially just the backdrops. Makes it look nice. It's better than a white screen, but it doesn't engage the user a lot. So today we're going to talk about things that engage the user. We're going to try to, get all your Scratch programs. We're going to try to get them to get those likes out there. There's a lot of people looking at your projects, some people liking them, some commenting. These are going to be the kinds of things that gets your project noticed by other people. And so we're going to work on that today. What I need you to do to get started is I started to build this out for you already with the proper sprites. I already put the proper sprites in the spot. So let's go to scratch.mit.edu, and we're going to go into the search bar here, and we're going to search future of code. And go ahead and click enter. Now, you'll notice if you guys have watched any of our other videos, not much has changed when you search for our projects. This is kind of a bummer in Scratch. If you search for an account name, it doesn't always show all the projects that are shared. What you need to do is come over here to where it says future of code. Don't click on the game itself. Don't click on match game, but click on the name Future of Code, and that's going to take you to our main page, to our main Scratch page, that is. And we're going to go to this one that says how to make stages. So it's the very first one here, how to make stages. Go ahead and click on that. And then what I need you to do is click remix. There should be a remix button right here. It's a little kind of greenish looking button. Go ahead and click that so that it saves to your account, because we want it to be on your account. We don't really mind if it's on ours, but if you make any changes, it's not going to save it. So go ahead and hit that, and it'll save to your account. That way, anything you're doing here will be saved, and you don't lose your progress. So, and then let's click see inside. And here is what we're looking at. Should be no code in any of this, but we should have 4 sprites. Okay. So these 4 sprites, I'll explain them. The first one here, I'm going to show it. All of them are hidden. The first one here is a star field, but you'll notice it's not very big. So to make this thing scroll, we're going to have to work a little bit of magic here. And what we're going to do is it's going to be like a ship. If a ship was flying over the top of this, you'll notice the stars in the backdrop are moving, or on the stage are moving. So that's the first one. The second one is part of a Chips Challenge game. So the second one, I'm going to show you how to combine 3 sprites to make a character move around and make the background move around. So here's our very furthest back piece. This is essentially a backdrop itself. And then the third one is an addition to this. It is the walls of the game. And then the fourth one is going to be our character. So I'm going to show you how to move all of these around to where it looks like the character is moving around, but what's actually happening is the background is moving around and the character is staying in one place. And there's some tricks to this that I'm going to teach you, especially when it comes to collisions. When we run the character into a wall, how does the character know we hit the wall? And more importantly, how do we make sure he doesn't get stuck once he hits the wall? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. The first thing we're going to start with, though, is going to be the stars. So what we need to do is highlight the one that's stars 1 and click the show button. So there's 2 buttons here, and they kind of look like eyes. One has a line through it and the other one doesn't. That means that it's hidden. When it's blue, that's the active button. So we're going to show it, and this will show our star field for us. So pretty small. Not a lot of stars in there, just little pixels here and there, very random. I created this a long time ago now, a couple years ago now. I did Photoshop, and I believe it was like Gaussian blur and some other things to create a randomized star field like this. So it won't show. Well, hopefully if we just went through it, I hope that, I'm not sure if you said that first or if I said how to show it first, but the show and hide are right here, right on top of the sprite section. So go ahead and click that show button for the star field and let us know if it doesn't work. And nice to see you again, Batman Gamer. Glad you guys are back. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to make it to where this sprite is scrolling down. So we're going to make it look like the stars are moving, but we're just moving the backdrop. So it gives us the feel that there is movement of the character, but we're not actually moving the character. And in fact, we don't have a character in this one just because I wanted to create the star field alone. But it'll look like the character's moving through space, but it's just the backdrop that's moving for us. So the first thing we're going to do is, like all of our, like almost all of our, I shouldn't say all of our, but almost all of our code, we're going to start with when green flag is clicked, because of course when we start the game is when I want it to start scrolling. This might not be the case. You know, you might want it to scroll at different times, but we want it to scroll right off the bat. Now what we want to do next is, since this is a backdrop, see these backdrops here, when we actually use it in the stage section, it actually already goes as far back as possible in the layers. That means that everything shows up in front of it, and the backdrop is the furthest thing from the user. Well, we don't have that when we use a sprite as a backdrop. So we actually need to go into looks, and we need to do this manually. We need to tell it, when it runs the code, we need to say it needs to go to the furthest layer back. This means that everything else can be seen in front of it, like maybe a spaceship. So in looks, you see go to front layer. It's down near the bottom. And we're going to take go to front layer, and we're going to change that once we bring it in here. We're going to drag this in. And we're going to change go to front layer. Click on that diamond shape, and we're going to change to go to back layer. This means it's going to send it all the way back. It's going to send it away from the user. All your other sprites will show up in front of it. The next thing we need to do is I want to make sure that this is in the spot where I want it to be. And I already figured the numbers out here, so I'm just going to plug them in. But I'm going to go to motion. And in motion, I'm going to tell it go to X and Y. And the X and Y for this, it's not quite perfect. It's 6 and 450. And this is going to move it all the way up to the top. Because we want it to, we're going to make it scroll from the top to the bottom. That way it looks like we're moving forward. So this kind of, what the 6 is doing, it's a little off center, and there's a reason for that. I won't go into it too much, but we're going to off center it just a little bit, and then we're moving it all the way up to the top as far as we can before it kind of gets a little snagged up at the top, and that's why we see just a little bit of black here. All right, now what we wanted to do is we're going to make sure this thing scrolls as long as our game is running. Well, since it's as long as our game is running, the thing we want to use with this is a forever loop. And that's because as long as the game's running, if the game were to run forever, we want this to run forever. So let's go to control. And in control, we're going to grab the forever loop and drag that in. So these two things before the forever loop are just to get it started. It's just to initialize it. It's just to get it put up to the top. We're going to wait for it up there, and then we're going to let it scroll down later. So these are initializers. We only have to worry about them once. Whatever's inside this forever loop, we're going to worry about forever. Well, to create this scrolling effect, we need to move it down. Well, we can look at the backdrops here. You don't have to do this. I'm going to do this for you. In the backdrops here, there's one that has a grid, and it shows us our X and Y coordinates. Well, it shows us that X is on this horizontal line, and Y is on a vertical line. So what we want it to do, if we want it to scroll down, we're going to actually adjust its Y location. So let's go into motion, and let's see what we have for that. In motion, we have a change X and change Y. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab this change Y by 10, and let's drag this into the forever loop. Here's the thing though, if we look at our graph again has X and Y, X horizontal, Y vertical, but it's kind of hard to see here because we got something in the way. But if I move it just for a second, you'll notice that when we're at the top, Y is 180, and when we're at the bottom, Y is equal to negative 180. So that's these here. You see the orientation of it is at negative 180. So that means that as we move from top to bottom, we're subtracting from Y. So here, change Y by 10. We actually want to make that a negative because we're going to be subtracting from Y. And what we want to do is negative 2. So this gives it a soft scroll. So you'll notice it doesn't just scrolls nice and soft. If we were to do something slower, it would be slower. So negative 1 would be a little bit slower. Negative 5 would be faster. Again, this is up to you and how you want your game to look. for the game that I created, I took this from, -2 is what we used. Again, it's up to you what you would like, but negative, you see, goes down. If I were to change this to positive, you'll notice it goes back up. So we want it to go down because we're going to be moving forward. Now that might be something that you can change if you want to create a game where you could go backwards and forwards. You would change your Y by -2 or +2, depending on which direction you told the spaceship to go. So there's some options there. Okay. Now we have a bit of a problem here, and the problem is that when it gets to the bottom, it gets stuck. And so we want it to not get stuck at the bottom. We want it to come up here. We want it to keep moving. Every time I hit the green flag, we want it to keep moving, but once it gets to the bottom, nothing's happening. And that's because the sprite doesn't know, it knows it hit the bottom of its threshold. It knows it got as far down as it could go, but it doesn't know when to go back to the top. Because what we're going to do is we're just going to cycle this over and over again. So what we need to do is we need to check to see if we hit below the threshold of where it's at. Well, the threshold first is what we should probably figure out. And I'm noticing here that X hasn't changed, which is good because we're not telling it to change X. We're telling it only to change Y. But our Y direction, our up and down direction, our threshold seems to be at -402. That's when it gets stuck. And I can check this by dragging it up and letting it go again and seeing how far it goes. And sure enough, it's going to stop at 402 once again. So what we can do is, instead of checking for 402, we want to subtract just a little bit from that. And that's where we'll make our threshold. Our threshold, I'm going to say, is going to be 400. Once it reaches 400, we should tell it, hey, go back up to the top and start to come back down again. So let's do that. What we're going to do is let's go to control. And in control, we're going to grab a if-then statement. And just drag that out. You don't have to put it in our main block of code yet, but drag it out to the side. And like I said, we want to check to see if it's around 400. So what we're looking for is in motion, and we're looking for our Y position. So we have our X position left to right and our Y position top to bottom. We're looking for our Y position, and sure enough, at the bottom of motion, we have a pill shaped block that says Y position. Let's go ahead and drag that in. Now, since we're doing some comparisons, in comparisons we need to use operators, and we're going to use some different operators here. Now, here's the trick, is when you're creating a game, one of the things that I've seen people do a lot, and I always see it create a bug, is people always try to make it equal to something. Now, that's great, but equal to something is going to be very hard to hit. So if we try to say when this sprite is equal to -400, it may not equal -400 ever. If we change this by 3 each time, it's not going to hit -400. It's going to pass below and above it. So that's kind of a complication because we want it to hit 400, but we just know that's our threshold. So what we're going to do is we're going to say that any time, if at any point Y passes -400, we're going to tell it to go back up to the top. So with a pass, what we can do is we can actually say when Y is less than something, we're going to make it go back up to the top. So, and the way to think about this is it doesn't make sense using a less than for some people, and I get that. But a less than, and I'll show you, let me build it here. So let's take Y position, and we're going to put that in the first spot. And then in the second spot, we're going to put -400. So when Y position is less than -400. And the way to think about this is you think, oh, well, 402 is greater than 400. It is, but -402 is less than -400. Because again, remember, we're working in negatives here. So that's why this may look a little bit confusing, because the number we're expecting seems bigger, but it's only bigger in the fact that it is farther away from 0. But it is still less than our threshold, which is negative 400. So it's a little bit of math to mess with your head, but greater than and equal than, it's tough to think about. A lot of people make that mistake. It's okay. So we're going to take this y position is less than negative 400, and we're going to drop this into our if-then block. Okay. Now that we have that if-then built, and again, if I'm going too fast for you guys, please let me know. I'm more than happy to slow down if you guys are behind. Just gotta let me know. Type it into the chat, and I'm watching it. Okay. We have this built. When we reach the bottom here, what we wanted to do is we wanted to go back up to the top. So the way we can do this is we were changing y by 2, but we can actually use a different one in here, and that's set y. So we change y means that we're going to adjust it. Setting it means that we are going to, or excuse me, let me clarify that. Change y means that we're going to take wherever we're at, and we're going to adjust it by that amount. So if we're at 400 and we move negative 2, it's going to go to negative 402. Set, though, is more definitive. Set means it's not going to change it by that much. It's going to set it to that, and it's going to be very, very critical that it's only that. So if I were to say set it to 10, it would go from where it's at now, negative 402, and it would come up to 10 here on our x and y coordinates. Oops. Okay, so set means go to a specific location. Change means take whatever my location is and adjust it just a tiny bit. So let's grab set y to 402, and you'll see what I mean here in a second. And we're going to change set y to 402 and put that set y to 402 inside our if-then block. And we're going to set this to 450. Now 450 is at the top of our graph here. And we'll see what this does in just a second. What we want to do is, I'm gonna reset the program here just so you can see from the beginning. We're gonna drag this if-then block, and we're gonna drop it right below change y by negative 2, but inside of our forever loop. Now watch what this does. This is going to start from the top. It's going to scroll down. It's going to keep scrolling. As we watch our y coordinates here, they're getting smaller and smaller. We just hit 0. Now we're into the negatives. And watch it as it hits 400. It will pop back up to the top. There we go. It's going to scroll again. Okay, so this actually looks pretty good. But we have a problem here. Our problem is that as it's scrolling, it leaves a lot of white space in the background, a lot of blank space. We have our nice star-laden background, but we don't have a lot of it. So as we reset it, it's always going to, leave a bunch of space below, and as it gets to the end, it'll leave a bunch of space above. So we're actually going to duplicate this sprite. So what I want you to do is go to stars 1 sprite and right click on that sprite. And you're going to get the options to duplicate, export, or delete. Go ahead and click duplicate, and it'll create stars 2 for us. Now stars 2, you'll notice that it kept our code and everything. So our code still says go to 6, 450, go to the layer back, change by 2. You'll notice it doesn't quite solve it for us though. If I click the green flag, both stars 1 and stars 2 are now cycling, but they're cycling at the same rate in the same place. We want them to cycle at the same rate. We want them to go from the top to the bottom at the same time, but stars 2 needs to be offset a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to tell it to change its initial position, because all we have to do is start it at a slightly different spot, and it will actually change it for us to where it cycles. Even though they're both going at the same rate, one is going to flip before the other one and then another one. So they kind of do a leapfrog thing. And we create that leapfrog thing by starting in 2 different positions. If you think about leapfrog in general, the game that you might play, one person starts in front of the other and then they bounce over them and then over them and then over them and so on and so forth. But those two people start in two different positions. They don't start one person standing on top of the other person. Well, that's what our code's doing right now, is one sprite is standing on top of the other. So let's reset that. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to X and Y. And this Y in here, what we're going to do is, instead of 450, we're going to change that to 50. We're going to adjust this by 400 pixels. So we're going to tell it, don't start where the other one starts, start a little bit lower. Or a lot lower in the case of 400 pixels. Now, if I hit our green flag, we should get a nice star field and no white background. I hope you guys are getting that. I'm pretty happy. That was not too bad. Now, where I use this one, we use this one in one of our classes. We have a game where we teach how to work with lists and variables and whatnot. And the game that we use is a Star Wars game, and it's a ship game. What it is X-Wing versus TIE Fighter, and the X-Wing is flying through space, and the TIE Fighters are flying at you, and you try to blow up the TIE Fighters to get gems. So what we wanted to do is, even though the main portion of the game is the TIE Fighters coming at us and us flying at them and shooting, we want the background to show some motion. We don't want it to just be the TIE Fighter and X-Wing moving around. We want the user to feel like they're actually flying through some space. So this is why we do this background like this. And you'll notice it's kind of cool. It's a little bit mesmerizing to look at. So not much code, only 2 sprites, and we were able to add something that really takes our game up another notch. So this is our first one. Pretty fun, not too bad. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to hide both of these sprites. So I'm going to go to Stars 1, and in the show area here, I'm going to click the eye with the cross through it, and then go to Stars 2 and hide that as well, so that we're back to our base background. Then what I want to do is, let's go to the Chips Challenge ones. So Chips Challenge, go to the first one here, click Show button. Go to the second one, click the Show button, and go to the Chips Challenge guy and click the Show button. Now with this one, what we're going to do is we're going to make Chip move around the board. However, in older games, typically our characters didn't move around the board. We didn't move from side to side or anything. Our characters stayed in one spot and the background moved around. And that gave us the feeling that we were moving the character through a level. However, the level was moving around us. Not always the case, like Pac-Man wasn't that way, but if you think about Mario, you move Mario back and forth in your TV, but once you hit a certain spot, the background starts moving. So we're going to create something like that. So what we have to do with this one is we have to keep track of our character and what he's doing. And then that is coming from our user. So our user is telling us move the character left, move the character right, so on and so forth. But what we're doing with that is we're then translating from the character and actually telling the background, hey, you're going to move left, you're going to move right, and doing the adjustments for our character, but just giving the directions to the background. So let's start off in our Chips Challenge guy here. I actually think his name was Chip. And the first thing we want to do is let's go to Events, and we're going to grab when green flag is clicked. Now we're going to do some initializing with him. And the things I want to do is I want to initialize him in motion. Let's go to motion, and we're going to grab go to X and Y. And I want the X and Y to be 1 and 16. I want X to equal 1 and Y to equal 16. And the reason for this is he's a little off center. When I did the sprites, he became a little off center, so we need him to be just a few pixels off. The next thing we want to do is let's go to looks. And in looks, we're going to go down to set size to, and it says 100. Let's drag in set size to 100. But we want to set the size to 95. And this is important because of how we're going to move the background. And this is going to matter when we go to run into objects, run into these walls. We need to have our pixels set perfectly. And I'll show you why here soon. The next thing we want to do is we're going to create two variables. Like I said, when we move chip, we want to tell the background that it's actually going to move. So what we need to do is we need to translate what's going on with our user and chip to our background, and we're going to do that through variables. So let's go to variables, and we're going to create, I already have these created. We're going to have two here. We're going to have scroll X and scroll Y. And what we want to do is we want to grab set, and mine says block movement to 0. Let's grab set block movement to 0, but we actually want to change that to scroll X. And then we're going to drag out another set and change this to scroll Y. So it says set scroll X to 0 on one block and set scroll Y to 0 on the other block. So this is going to tell us how many blocks over he's moving. So it'll eventually add up and subtract based on which direction he moves. And that tells us how far we need to move our background. Now we want to do one more thing, and this is just a little bit tricky. Let's go into control. And I mean tricky as in it's a trick to prevent a bug. It's not tricky to create. We're going to grab a forever block in control and drop that in the bottom. And then we're going to go to looks. And in looks, we're going to grab the block, go to front layer. And what this is going to do is this is going to make sure the chip is always on the front layer. There's a bug that if you were to click on the backdrop here, that it would bring the backdrop over chip and it would hide him. So this makes sure that just make sure that we never hide chip. And I'll give you guys a second just to make sure you have all that. Okay. So now, when we move chip around, thankfully there's some very easy keys to do this. I'm going to use the arrow buttons on the keyboard. So when we use the arrow buttons on the keyboard, if we go to events, our second block down says when space key is pressed. But if we click on this, we can actually use up arrows, down arrows, right arrows, left arrows, any key, or we can use a myriad of letters and numbers. Well, what we want to do is we want to use up arrows, down arrows, and so forth. So I'm going to drag in 4 of these. And what this is going to do is it's going to represent our up, down, left, and right. And I'm going to change them accordingly. So the first one I'm going to say up. The next one I'm going to say down. Then I'm going to say right. And then I'm going to say left. So I have 4 blocks. One says when up arrow key is pressed. The next one says when down arrow key is pressed. The next one says when right arrow key is pressed. And the one after that says when left arrow key is pressed. So we should have all 4 directions taken care of. Now, the first thing I want to do is I just want to make chip move up and down. So what I'm going to do, like I said, is I'm going to save, when I press the up arrow or down arrow, I'm going to save a number to our scroll X and scroll Y that lets me know that chip is supposed to move. Again, we're not going to move chip, we're going to move the background. That's why we're saving it to our scroll X and Y. So let's do that. Let's go in here and we're going to come into variables. And when I press the up arrow, I want to change my Y direction by -34. Now this seems weird. If we're going up, we know that's positive. But the thing is we're thinking about the background. When we go up, the background needs to shift down. because it's going to look like we're moving forward. So we need to shift the background in a negative direction. When we go down, we're going to shift it in a positive direction because we're trying to create inverse movement of the background. To make our character look like it's moving forward, the background has to move backwards. So we're going to grab the block that says change block movement by negative or by 1. We're going to switch that over to scroll Y, and it's going to say change scroll Y by 1. And let's drag that into the up arrow. But like I said, we want to change that to a negative. Now, we want them to change one block at a time. You'll notice the background's a bunch of blocks. I've already figured out how big those are, and those are 34 pixels. So when we press the up arrow, we want to change our scroll Y by 34 pixels. And you don't have to activate these, but I'll show you that we're going to, when we change them, it'll show our change in X and Y. Now we can duplicate this. We can change scroll Y by 34. Let's duplicate that, or negative 34, excuse me. We're going to duplicate that, and we're going to drag it down to the down arrow section. But again, since we're going down, we need to move the number positive. So we're going to make that positive 34. And what we'll get is that when I press the up key, it changes by 34, negative 34. And when I press the down key, it changes by positive 34. So you see we get this addition going on inside our scroll Y. This is going to tell our background to change in any given direction. All right, well, since we're changing those directions, that's great, but it doesn't seem to be changing the background yet. Let's go do some background code. The first thing I want to change is the very, very bottom piece. So let's click on that. That is the Chips Challenge background here. It's just a nice, looks like a gray square. Now, before we do anything, I want to set this to where, we initialize it. We got to get this initialized so that if anybody adjusts this in any way, shape, or form, like drags it sideways, that the next time the game starts, it will readjust and it'll look good. So let's start with the events button when green flag is clicked. So click on events, and then when green flag is clicked. And then we're going to do, just like we did with Chip, we're going to come into motion. And in motion, we're going to grab go to X and Y. Well, we want to make these 0 and 0. We want this to show up dead center. So that's not too bad. Looks dead center. Chip looks like he is in the right spot. Now we got a couple problems here though. We also want, let's go into looks. And we just happen to be lucky right now that the size is already set, but the size needs to be 150. So in looks, grab set size to 100. Drag that in and change that to 150. So it needs to be set size to 150. Now you notice we have one more problem here. Like we moved Chip forward, this ground is supposed to be the very, very back portion of our level, but it's in front of our walls. So we also need to come in to looks, and we need to change the go to front layer. We need to make that go to back layer, and let's bring that block in. So go to front layer, we're going to change back, go to back layer, and that should make sure that our walls are our ground is in the back, our walls are in the middle, and Chip is in front. Okay, now we can get to the meat and potatoes of the code, so to say. We can get to the the delicious code, and that is moving the background. So let's go in, and we're going to go to events, and we're going to grab a when green flag is clicked. Now this is super simple. I know that you're thinking like, okay, we're moving Chip, we're keeping track of his movement. How are we going to move the background? It is way easier than you would think. And this is what makes this trick really amazing, is that it's super simple. So let's go into forever, because we always want to know when, or let's go into control, excuse me. We always want to know when chip is moved. So we constantly need to be tracking if scroll X and scroll Y have adjusted. Let's grab the forever loop and drag that into the under when green flag is clicked. And you could put these together. I separated them just because I wanted to show you which code is initializing and which code is actually doing the work. Yes, these could go together. I'm sure somebody out there is thinking that. You're absolutely correct, but I separated them just to make them look nicer. Okay, now what we're going to do is let's change that up and Y direction. So let's go to motion, and what we're going to do is we're going to not change the X and Y by whatever scroll Y or scroll X is, but we're going to set it to that. And you'll see that it's actually going to adjust it constantly because we're always adding or subtracting for it. We always want to make sure that we're constantly adjusting it to a very set location. And that, like I said, that's the difference between change and set is super precise, whereas change is what's called relative. It's all relative to where you are right now. We don't want to be relative to where we are right now. We are being told what spot we need to be in. So let's go ahead and grab set Y to 0 and put that inside that forever loop. And then grab set X to 0 and put that in there as well. Okay. Now what we're going to do is, since we know that scroll X and scroll Y are variables, they're holding on to that number for us. If the variables thing, if you're new to this and you're not understanding what variables are, trying to think what is our best, go back through some of our old videos. I describe variables in a lot more details in 2 of our old videos. Trying to remember which one's the best, and I can't remember off the top of my head at the moment. But I do describe them in a ton more detail in other spots. Anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to then set Y to scroll Y and set X to scroll X. So click on variables and grab scroll X, the pill button, and set that inside the 0. So replace the set X to 0 as set X to scroll X. And then set Y to 0 will be replaced with scroll Y. Now, if things worked well, if I move up and down, you can see that my background is adjusting. However, my walls are not adjusting. You'll see I can scroll outside of my background, but the walls, I'm still in the center of the walls. So what we can do is we can actually take a lot of this code and we can copy this over to our walls. So let's go ahead and do that. If you click on the code that you want to copy, you can drag it around. Click and hold. And what you want to do is click, hold, drag this. And when I drag this over to our sprites, they highlight. And if I drop it on top of the walls, it'll actually copy that code over. So I'm going to copy both pieces of this code over. So there's the first piece, and the second piece, when green flag is clicked forever, scroll Y, scroll X, let's drag that to the walls as well. Now I have both of those copied inside this other sprite. We're going to have to change some stuff here though. And it's not actually a lot. It's kind of nice. The only thing we have to change is if I try to make both of the walls and the background go to the back layer, it might mess something up. So where I have when green flag is clicked, go to X equals 0, Y equals 0. That's fine because it needs to be centered. The size is actually still 150, which is good. But this go to back layer, let's get rid of that. So go ahead and drag that, and let's drag that off to the side and get rid of that piece of code. Let's hit the green flag button again, and look at that. Our walls actually move with it. However, we'll notice a bit of a problem here is we can actually walk through the walls. That's not really what we want the walls to do. So what we need to do is we need to say if we're running into a wall, we shouldn't move. We shouldn't be able to move into a wall. So we need to say, okay, has the user clicked this button? Yes, they clicked the button to move, but should they be able to move? Well, we're going to dictate that in chip. Well, let's go back to chip, and we're going to edit these up and down arrow key press buttons blocks again. And this isn't too bad. What we need to do is we're trying to decide if they can do something. So let's go to control. And in control, we're going to grab the if-then statement. If they can do something, then do it. So let's pull out the if-then statement, and we're going to just drop this off to the side. You don't have to connect it to any code yet. Now, when we want to be, we can tell when one sprite is touching another sprite. We want to move when we're not touching a wall. So one of the keywords there that I use is, I use two keywords. I use touching and not. So let's go into sensing, and we'll start with that one. And sure enough, in sensing, the first thing we have is touching mouse pointer. Well, we can click on this down arrow, and you have Chips Challenge 1 walls. It's Chips Challenge was the game, level 1, and then the walls were the sprite. That's the naming convention I used. So we're going to say, okay, are we touching the walls? Well, let's just drag this in. Let's not put it in any code yet. But we don't want to know when we're touching the walls. We want to know when we are not touching the walls. That's when we can move, is if we're not touching the walls. If we are touching the walls, we shouldn't be able to move. So not is the other keyword. And that's in operators. So let's go to operators. And we have not. There's and, or, and right before or right below or is not. Let's drag that in as well. I'm going to move some of these off to the side here so they're less in the way. Okay, so we have touching walls, not, and then our if-then block. Let's combine these to make our proper logic statement. So we want to know when it's not touching the walls. So let's drag the touching into the not block. So now that we have something telling us, when we are not touching the walls, we will drag this into our if-then block. And then what we want to do is let's change this scroll Y by -34 in our up arrow. Let's take that change and drop that change, remove it from the when up arrow key is pressed, and put it inside that if-then block. And actually what we can do is we are going to duplicate this if-then block, get rid of the -34 in there, and we're going to put this inside the down arrow as well. So let's take the change scroll Y by 34, drag that into our second if-then block, drop the +34 below the down arrow, and drag the -34 change below the up arrow block. And now we should have some nice code to tell us when we should and should not move. So let's try this. So I'm going to move around. I can move around just fine, but here's a problem. I can move in to that first block. When I go and hit the wall, I'm going to move down to the wall. Now I'm touching the wall just on the edge. This is when, if I hit the down arrow again, I shouldn't be able to move. However, if I hit the down arrow now, I'm going to move, and he's going to move on top of the first block in the wall, but now I can't move up or down. I'm stuck. So this is another bug. This is something we have to think about. Now, I'm going to show you the trick to solve this, and this is pretty neat, and it's because code runs so fast that we actually won't see it do what we want it to be doing. It's going to move, and we're not ever going to notice that it moved. So what we're going to do here is we're going to take Chip, and before we ever check to see if he's touching the wall, we're going to shift him just a little bit. And he's going to shift into the location he's moving into. So if he's moving down, we're going to shift him down just a little bit. And then we're going to check to see if he's touching a wall. And we're going to decide whether or not to move, depending on when he's touching the wall. But then, after we've decided, we're going to shift him back up just a little bit. So what we're going to do is we're going to off-center him just a little. And I'll show you how this works. So what we need to do is let's go into motion. And we're going to use the down arrow first. We're going to do the down arrow first this time. Go into motion, and we're going to take our change Y button. So let's grab change Y by 10, and we're going to drag this out, and we're going to drop this right below our if statement. So it's going to say when down arrow key is pressed, we want it to then say change Y by 10, and then we will have our if statement. And we want to change this to -10 because we're going to shift chip down 10 pixels. And I'll show you what this does. Let's expand chip here just a little bit. Now, when I scroll down, see what he does? He moves down just a little bit. So he's going to shift. And you see how his feet are just barely on the next block down. Now what he's doing here is we're kind of, think about it like moving around in the dark. When you move around in the dark, you don't normally just walk around with your arms down by your side because you might run into a wall. So your brain tells you, hey, you don't want to run into a wall. Why don't you put your hand out? So that's kind of what we're doing right now is we're telling Chip, put your hand out and touch and see if there's a wall. If there's a wall, don't move, stop. But what we want to do is after we've touched that wall, we're going to put our hand back down. So let's go in and I'm going to stop this from running. We have change Y by -10 and then check to see if he's touching a wall. But after we've checked, we want to change the Y back. So let's grab another change Y by 10 and drag that to the bottom. So what this tells us is we're going to say, hey, put your hand out, and that's how he shifts down just a little bit. And we say, okay, is there a wall there? Are you touching a wall? He's going to say yes or no, which allows us to move. But then we're telling him after that, put your hand down. So let's take a look at this now. Let's move up and down. We're moving up and down. But let's move down into the wall, and sure enough, now when we hit that wall, we are not able to actually move up and down. Or we are able to move up and down, excuse me, just not down since we hit the wall. We're not moving into the wall anymore, we're moving to the wall. And that's because of this change Y by -10 and change Y by 10. What you're doing is just searching out. Now what we can do for the up arrows, we're actually going to reverse this. Just like we reversed the numbers for scroll Y by 34 to -34, we're going to adjust the up arrow the same. We're going to grab another change Y by 10 block and drag that below the when up arrow key is pressed, but before the if then block. And then we're going to take one more and drag it to the bottom. And we will just reverse this from what we see in the down arrow. So in the down arrow, we move by -10 and then by 10. So in the up arrow, we're going to move by 10 and then back down by -10. So now if we do this, we should be able to be trapped going up or down within our walls. Now at this point, I'm going to let you guys finish the right and left arrow. I will give you guys a hint that as we worked with Y right here in the up and down arrow, the Y direction, which is up or down, in the right and left arrow, you have to work with X. So you don't have to do anything more in the background, but chip is where you're going to have to do the rest of the code. It is very, very similar. You just have to adjust to move left to right instead of up or down. Please feel free to leave any comments in the comment area of this video if you have any questions about that. If you're stuck, if you need help, it's not a problem. If you want more help than that, come and visit us on Tuesday in the Zoom classroom, and we will be able to help you then as well. But I'm going to leave the left and right arrow up to you guys as a challenge to try to create this, but move side to side instead. So with that said, I am going to say good night to everybody. Thank you guys for joining us. If you're just watching this video, please do like and subscribe. If you have already been watching, if you're already a fan of us, please do like the video too. That would definitely help. Subscribe. It will tell you when we are going to be on next, especially if you hit the little bell icon. It will notify you. And, come back. See us again. And bring your friends. Bring all your friends. Bring your parents, grandparents, everybody. Everybody's welcome. So, again, thank you guys. Go out, enjoy the weather. If you guys are in the Pacific Northwest area, it has been beautiful today. Hopefully it keeps up. And please stay safe, stay healthy, and I will see everybody very soon. Thanks, guys. Have a good night.